Hi there, everybody. Happy Friday. It's 4 o'clock in New York. Well, here we go again. If you hear that screeching sound, it's just the sound of the whole of the American economy once again swerving wildly across the interstate at 100 miles an hour. Behind the wheel, one guy, then one guy only. Donald Trump reignited our country's trade war today, making not one but two major and consequential announcements that stand to impact just about all of us, whether we like it or not. The first, a threat, the target, the EU. On social media, Donald Trump recommended, to whom no one seems to know, sweeping 50% tariffs on the European Union. They're to start on June 1st because, in his words, trade talks are, quote, going nowhere. It is a shock to the system, given something NBC News has reported early on. Quote, the EU bloc is America's second biggest trading partner behind China. The U.S. exported more than $350 billion of goods to the 27-nation bloc in recent years and imported $550 billion worth of goods. This morning, Republican Congressman French Hill, the leader of the House Financial Services Committee, was asked about this new tariff.
In the language this morning, the president said that he was going to recommend a 50% tariff starting on June 1st. Who's he recommending that to? The Senate? Like, I mean, if it's not an emergency, if it's not a fentanyl situation, does he have the authority?
Recommending it to himself.
Yeah, I think his pitch is, you're not at the table, we need you at the table.
We're at the he's recommending it to himself part of the Trump tariff story. Now, whether or not Trump has authority in this matter at all, the fact remains, as experts have repeated on this program and others over and over again, the cost of tariffs is eventually paid for and shouldered by the American consumers. It is a tax, which leads us to the second of Trump's big announcements today, again made on social media. He threatened Apple with a 25% tariff unless Apple starts producing iPhones in the U.S. In the course of making that threat, Trump suggested the tariff would, quote, be paid by Apple. A strange thing to say from the man who's long maintained that tariffs are paid for by other countries. But again, neither's true. It's the consumer that pays. Targeting Apple in this manner would bump the price of an iPhone up to about $3,500. And consumers who might have considered another brand of phone should know. Just this afternoon, Trump suggested Samsung and other mobile companies could face a similar 25% tariff. That is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. With me at the table, NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans. Also joining us, professor of economics and public policy at the University of Michigan, Justin Wolfers is back. Also joining us, former Republican Congressman David Jolly, who recently registered as a Democrat and is right now considering a run for governor of Florida. Let me start with you, Christine. What is the American consumer to make of these two announcements?
I mean, these are, again, shifting timelines and shifting tariff levels. And I mean, it's really hard to understand how much consumers eventually would have to pay for these things, because, again, is it the president negotiating? Is it the president trying to cajole Tim Cook into having more manufacturing in the United States? What is exactly the end game with the European Union? I mean, when I look at the things that the U.S. imports from the European Union, it's obviously like olive oil and Parmesan cheese, but it's also car parts and drugs and medicines and medical devices and things that a 50% tariff would be really, really disruptive to those supply chains. So where we go from here, who knows? But one thing that I think is very interesting, Nicole, is that on Liberation Day, so-called Liberation Day on April 2nd, the president had a 39% tariff on the EU, which everyone said, wait, that seems way too high. He paused it. And now, before that 90-day pause is over, there's a new deadline, a June deadline, and a new tariff rate of 50%. That's one of the reasons why markets are so unsettled. They don't see the strategy and they don't understand the follow-through.
Well, are they looking for a strategy, or have the markets recognized yet that with Donald Trump there isn't one?
I think markets are just concerned that businesses don't have any certainty. If you're a business who imports any of those things I just mentioned for the EU, what in the world are you doing as you're making your orders right now trying to decide what you're bringing in and at what price point and what you're going to use it in your business for, what you're going to sell it for. It's just, there's no clarity for these businesses still. We had been in a period of de-escalation, and you saw markets come back from where they had been in April with all that chaos. Markets slowly came back and recovered all of those losses. And now we've shifted, it feels like today, in one day, from de-escalation to then brand new threats with new timelines and new tariff levels. And so that's just injected all this uncertainty back into everything.
Do markets think that there's anyone checking Trump in the same way they did during 1.0 when they saw people like Gary Cohn and Steve Mnuchin around Trump, and they felt at least somewhat reassured that before he blew up our second largest trading partner relationship, that someone could stop him? Do they view this cabinet differently?
There had been a feeling among a lot of market participants and economists and business leaders that Scott Bessent was the shock absorber on the car. You had that great metaphor in your open of, this car, driving 100 miles an hour on the highway, and that Scott Bessent was the shock absorber there. But it seems as though there was an EU-U.S. call planned for today, and the president still made these threats. Mm-hmm. And it seemed as though, what is the strategy there? Was that before the meeting? Was it after the meeting? Either way, markets were unsettled there. I
want to come to you, David Jelly, with a question about this. What I find interesting is that, for me, watching Trump destroy the economy was just like watching Trump destroy the FBI, and just like watching Trump destroy DOJ, and just like watching Trump tap Hegseth to destroy the Pentagon in 2.0, and just like watching Trump tap Tulsi Gabbard to destroy the intelligence community. It was simply another arena where he was going to be chaotic and unsettling, to borrow Christine's word, and unpredictable. What about the fact that he is now indifferent to market swings is new and notable to you?
Look, I think there are weeks where we have to revisit the conversation that he is increasingly unstable and arguably unwell. The problem is he is able to wield executive power in areas of national and economic security. And Nicole, if you were trying to destroy a nation from the outside, but much less from within, you would do a couple of things. You would first break our security alliances with the West, our long-held allies. You would empower our enemies. We have seen that in the first 100+ days. You would also disrupt our domestic economy. That is essentially what he is attacking at this point, to your point. And third, you would break the ability of the government to provide services to its people. That is complete disruption, not only of government, but of culture and of society. And Donald Trump seems to not care about the fallout from this. I think it raises hard questions, as always, for Republicans then. Look, Donald Trump won't be on the ballot again. The Republicans have failed to check him. They have elevated and celebrated him. But what happens when they go home over Memorial Day weekend and during a recess? I mean, you are looking at a president who is declaring economic warfare on our allies at the same time that the Congress is passing a bill to explode our debt and our deficits, and also cut delivery of healthcare services to seniors and those in need. So what type of positioning is this for today's Republican Party that they find defensible? I think we're seeing it in the numbers, and I think Republicans right now are terrified. But outside of the political question, we should all be terrified, because this is a president who has destabilized the world order in terms of our own national security interests, as well as our economic security. Look, at some point, we do have to revisit the conversation that this is a president who is unstable and increasingly unwell.
Well, to your point about the numbers, I mean, 66% of all Americans disapprove of Donald Trump's handling of inflation. That's 66% of Americans. 66% of Americans didn't vote for Kamala Harris. That's 66% of Americans who are available to vote for someone who is against Donald Trump's handling of inflation. 63% of all Americans disapprove of Donald Trump's tariff policy before, as Christine also pointed out, we're on a 90-day pause. They haven't even hit. So before they've even hit, 63% of all Americans disapprove of Donald Trump's tariff policy. There are 63% of Americans who are available to a politician who is against Donald Trump's approach to tariffs and inflation, David.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Nicole. And look, given all of the controversy around the last year of the Biden administration, the one thing we know is They had largely brought, with the assistance of the Fed, of course, arguably the leadership of the Fed, Donald Trump inherited an economy that was relatively stable. Real wages were up, labor markets were tight, unemployment was down, the stock market was at an all-time high. We were at least seeing certainty, right? Inflation causes a certain amount of uncertainty, of course, but there was a certain stability in the economy that was allowing consumer confidence to reemerge. Donald Trump has just blown that up. And there, as we've talked often, we don't need to belabor it. There is no broader economic strategy here where he's going to spend 4 years pivoting us towards domesticating new industries. This is all done on a whim. And where it does inject uncertainty into the markets, we certainly see it day to day in the markets. It is injecting uncertainty into people's personal economies. And I think that's why you're seeing numbers in the 60s saying, wait a minute, I don't like this. It is because it is being felt in people's personal economies. The level of economic uncertainty now is so much higher than it was when Joe Biden handed off what was a stable economy to Donald Trump. Look, you broke it, you bought it, Republicans. This is your guy. You start explaining to the American people why he's right, but you can't do it, which is why you're losing special elections this cycle, and you're facing a generational change election next November where Democrats are going to be able to tell a very good story.
Tonight, Donald Trump is losing again, including in key areas where he has tried to use or allegedly abuse government power to go after foes. But against those losses, he is doubling down on the so-called retribution tour. So it's really a story of two sides of the same coin. Here's how Politico, the nonpartisan Washington outlet, puts it. We've hit, quote, full throttle as they report the revenge campaign is expanding by the day with an ever-lengthening list of targets. And this is something we've seen not only this week, but over the past several weeks. Trump sometimes loses. Some folks fight back. Some judges and courts agree with the people fighting back against what in some cases has been found to be government abuse or illegal and unlawful efforts to go after people. But then Trump, unlike really most modern presidents faced with setbacks, doubles down further. The testing, sometimes courting defiance. Testing the limits of what not only Trump but his aides can do in clearly risky ways, as some people win when they fight back.
The former FBI director's use of the term 86 has sparked something totally different, totally new, unprecedented, an investigation by the Trump administration.
One of the real problems we have in this country right now is the use of the president's power aiming at individuals who don't have my background or experience.
U.S. Attorney Alina Habba has announced charges against New Jersey Congresswoman LaMonica McIver.
This is not typical to charge a member of Congress, and neither is the way the Justice Department rolled it out.
It's political intimidation, and I'm looking forward to my day in court.
Pursuing her on that day's incident for a related, now collapsed case and arrest the same day of the Newark mayor.
We agreed to dismiss the case collectively. I mean, obviously, it was a baseless case.
The executive branch weaponizing government.
When you look at the investigations, it's a lot of critics of Donald Trump and Democrats.
Those who break the law should be prosecuted.
The Harvard community is reeling this morning after the Trump administration revoked its ability to enroll international students.
This is authoritarianism on steroids.
There you hear it. The escalation, what critics and foes call authoritarian tactics, even as in the first run, the early days, as we wrap up a week where the big case against a Democratic mayor was yanked by the Trump DOJ itself. We heard him there in that montage. That's the Newark mayor. So even as they lose that one on the Trump side, and even as Harvard is getting some good signs, they just keep expanding the target list, which raises serious questions about what to do when even their losses aren't dissuading them. So I want to get right to it tonight. Gene Robinson, the Pulitzer Prize winner, joins us and knows his way around so many of these issues. And for a more political perspective, an Obama campaign veteran, Che Komanduri. Welcome to you both. Gene, I show how this is going, and we have another Harvard and law firm headline here tonight I'll start with. Some firms bent, but now you have a judge striking down the order that targeted Jenner and Block. That's one of these firms. The ruling saying that Trump is, quote, trying to chill legal representation they don't like by punishing lawyers. The fairest way I can put it, Gene, is governments are allowed to issue orders and test things, but when they find out they're illegal, they have to stop. And that's really what is now being tested as we go into this holiday weekend and the next couple weeks. On the law firms, on that mayor I mentioned, they are being told to stop.
Yeah, they're being told to stop, but they're not stopping. I mean, they keep doing these things, and maybe this is what we have to look forward to for the foreseeable future. This isn't so much testing the boundaries of what of executive power, of what the president can do, because in some of these cases he's being told, absolutely, you can't do this, and yet he does it to somebody else, or he does it maybe in a slightly different way, or he does it more, and says, well, can I get away with that? And so the courts once again have been the sort of final protection, our final protection against really an out of control executive, and this may have to go on for a while, because I don't know how you make him stop other than telling him no, no, no.
Yeah, Che, we all know the term politics as usual.
Right.
This isn't supposed to be politics as usual. Letting it become usual, even if they eventually back down, the Trump DOJ did drop the case against the mayor quickly. But they still think politically, that's where I turn to you on the politics, they think they're getting something out of it, and that not everyone will be like the mayor or James Comey and want to deal with this. So I leave that for your reflection, Che. We'll get your answer. I just want to share what the mayor, in his own words, Baraka, told us about that case being pulled. This was earlier this week.
Our lawyers and their lawyers got together and made a quick decision that this should be not tried in any court at all. I think this is clearly being driven by that desire to do what was said earlier, to hurt people, to embarrass people, to humiliate folks, and they'll go further than that if they can.
Che?
Yeah, I mean, so the Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill opens with the line, revenge is a dish best served cold. The problem is that Donald Trump is serving us revenge piping hot. And that's actually the political problem. This is something that is designed entirely just for his base, entirely to show that he is an authoritarian, that he is showing masculine dominance over his enemies. But it's not reaching, the average American. And Donald Trump's approval ratings are dropping because he's pursuing things like this. Frank Sinatra, somebody that Trump says was a friend of his, Nancy Sinatra says Sinatra loathed him. Sinatra said the best success, the best revenge is massive success. Donald Trump really wanted revenge on his enemies. He could do it by governing well. He could do it by taking the economy Joe Biden left him and improving it. Instead, he's actually doing the reverse, and he's spending all his time pursuing these revenge targets that are, frankly, very poorly thought out and seem totally impulsive, like everything else he does.
Eugene?
Yeah, it does seem to be massively counterproductive what he's doing, because, as Che said, his approval ratings are not good. He's doing these crazy things with the economy that make everything worse rather than better. Today, he announces 50% tariffs, and then Scott Bessent takes it back, and then he says, no, really, we're going to do 50% tariffs against Europe, and the markets fall. I mean, and that's not a good look for this president, who just so loves to portray himself as successful in all things, especially as successful in business. Again, is it just impulse, or does he think there's actual political gain in all of this? I'm not sure, but it's clearly not really working in his benefit.
Right. I mean, and it can be both. There may be someone who thought, well, let's have an immigration-related clash. They've clearly courted that in going after a local judge. That case is murkier. And now 2 indictments in the ICE facility clash, which was not murky. Many accounts discredited the legal claim by the DOJ. And as I mentioned, 1 case dropped. And so it may be, to Gene's point, both. It may be that they thought, oh, this is immigration, we want to push that issue, yada, yada. But then some incompetent people rushed the arrest without finding out that there was public video evidence showing the authorities welcoming the mayor in, which is the opposite of trespassing. Che, I want to turn to another setback that Trump just got today by giving you a tough quiz that you may not get, and we won't be disappointed if you don't get it. What, since Che brings up culture, what do Natalie Portman and Conan O'Brien have in common that relates to the Trump retribution era we are in?
They both went to Harvard. Natalie Portman attended, I believe, from 2000 to 2004. She's a movie star that in the movie Social Network they talk about as being the most famous person on the campus. And Conan O'Brien also attended Harvard. There you go. So I'll jump in.
You got it.
Yes.
They both went to Harvard, and they both came from other countries. A lot of Americans like how they've contributed to this country. But they're one of the many talented people who came here legally, I should mention, and in demand. Harvard's not that easy to get into. And so the way that the Trump administration thought it would, quote, punish Harvard as they are in this standoff over even larger issues was shut down their ability to bring in future students from abroad to Harvard. Now, the government does have wide authority in general on that. For example, if there's a security reason, that's hard to overcome. But this looked so punitive that here's the headline from the New York Times, and this is breaking today. Judge blocks new Trump effort to bar international students at Harvard. Che, another area where they're losing in court, and the chosen battle lines are no longer Venezuelan alleged gang ties, but rather whether Americans like Conan being here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they thought that Harvard would be a really good target because it's the ultimate elitism, except for the fact that many members of the Trump family went to Harvard, including his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And it also shows how poorly thought out this whole thing is. I got news for you. Harvard will probably be fine. There is no university that has the financial resources that Harvard University has. It basically has a corporation that's the size of some small countries in some cases. And so to pick a fight with Harvard, is just such a poorly thought out piece of strategy. It just shows you the kind of impulsiveness that is driving the Trump revenge agenda.
Gene?
Yeah, and it's a misreading, I think, because in the case of Harvard, I think maybe on some level they just thought Harvard would cave, that Harvard would give up, that and not they didn't take into account that Harvard does have the resources to wait out the entire Trump administration if it wants to, amid all these punishments that are being attempted. So it was just a bad strategy to begin with, to pick on somebody who's big enough to hit you back.
To insinuate that this president is profiting off of the presidency.
She's funny, too. She's funny also. Because as far as I know, he's the only president I've ever heard of who sells his own Bible and watch.
Jimmy Kimmel mocking Trump press secretary over his apparent crypto grift. Trump holding a dinner last night for the top 220 buyers of his personal name-branded cryptocurrency. I just want to be careful for those of you who don't follow currencies well. These meme coins are not currency as you think it is. Trump speaking to attendees with the presidential seal in front of him. You see it there. Trump also suggesting that he would promote the crypto industry. All this despite his press secretary claiming that Trump was appearing in his personal capacity.
The president is attending it in his personal time. It is not a White House dinner. It's not taking place here at the White House.
Multiple dinner guests telling the Times, quote, they attended the event with the explicit intent of influencing Mr. Trump and U.S. financial regulations, end quote. On average, attendees reportedly bought around $2 million of crypto coin. A top ethics watchdog calling the dinner, quote, one of the most blatant and appalling instances of selling access to the presidency ever. This adding to the laundry list of ethics concerns, including the $400 million Qatari jet, the real estate deals in the Middle East, and a whole lot of other things. Joining me now, Leah Littman, law professor with the University of Michigan, co-host of the Strict Scrutiny podcast and author of the newly released Lawless, How the Supreme Court Runs on Conservative Grievance, Fringe Theories, and Bad Vibes. Leah, great to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
I don't know where to start with this. People have given donations to a party or a cause or a presidential library for a long time, and there are real questions about how much of that should be allowed or regulated. But this is the purchasing of something with no intrinsic value, the benefit of which goes directly to the President of the United States and his family corporation. That's just all it is. You know, back when we worried about emoluments and that little getting a hotel room, that was quaint.
Right. No, exactly. He's turned the presidency into an emoluments R Us. The idea that anyone who buys this meme coin now can get access to the free world. The leader of the free world, only it turns out it's not so free. The average cost is about $1.5 million, which is about 500 times the limit of campaign contributions. And so the amount of money it takes to get influence over policy and access to these political officials is just grotesque. And of course, not everyone can afford that. It creates this picture of a government that is for sale, a government not by the people, but a government for people who can actually buy into these insane meme coin dinners.
And we, you know, there's been some estimate from Bloomberg that Donald Trump has doubled his net worth since winning the election. You saw that trip around the Middle East. I mean, he picked up something everywhere he went. He almost got a Trump Tower in Damascus, too. But one of the most interesting things is this airplane that he told a story about how it was gifted. It was a free gift. And when you go there and you park your Air Force One next to all these fantastic airplanes, you know, we need something better. Monday night, I'm reading all these reports that none of that turns out to have been true. This was an absolute deliberate effort led by Trump's guy, Steve Witkoff, to get him a new plane.
No, he is just soliciting gifts or grifts, as the case may be. He apparently approached the Qataris for this jet. The jet was a hand-me-down that they were trying to offload. They managed to offload it, you know, onto the president of the United States. He's now asking the leaders of other foreign governments if they have a plane they can offer him, as we all saw in the White House meeting with the president of South Africa. And I think you can really draw a through line from what the Supreme Court has said constitutes corruption to what the president is doing, because what they've said is influence and access over political officials, even when it's purchased, just isn't corrupt. And that's led to them acting like, well, they are entitled to be kept men and just to be lavished with these gifts in largesse. And you can see that in the behavior of the president, who also thinks he can just jet around the world asking for planes, resorts, investments, meme coins, you name it.
Yeah, and in fact, the South African president did say something like, well, I wish I had a plane I could give you. Like, it's just so out there now that this is an actual thing. Are we happier that no one even pretends otherwise anymore? Or does just this normalize the idea that politics has been not the fairest thing in America as it relates to money for several years now, and now we're just going to not pretend that it's anything other than this?
I'm concerned about the normalization aspect of this, because I think they are doing this out in the open in an effort to kind of thumb their noses against the rules. And if this was the sort of stuff that was reported on and broken and not publicized, I think it would code as a scandal.
Right.
But they just come out and admit
Yep.
it, and then they treat it as if this is just how government works.
Right. They treat the reporters who ask the questions like you're the idiots. Right. So I guess the question is, what we have learned and what we learned in Trump 1.0 is that enforcement mechanisms on things that we thought are enforceable in many cases just don't exist, particularly as we learned with campaign finance. There's virtually no enforcement of campaign finance. What happens to a thing like this?
Well, this is a real problem. And when you say there's no enforcement of campaign finance, this is one of the things the Supreme Court has taken a hatchet to. You know, as I kind of describe in the book, they have demolished campaign finance law as well as political corruption law. And I think they are really enabling this new oligarchy and a rise in authoritarianism, because they are just declining to enforce laws that restrain the president or that restrain political corruption, except for the laws that they like, based on this very overly narrow definition of corruption as only involving a quid pro quo bribery. And they just insist that nothing else is corruption, and that's just how government works.
But and when we look at, when you look at all the stuff that went on in the Middle East, how hard is it to indicate that there's a quid pro quo there? You, Saudi Arabia, want something, I get a hotel. You, Qatar, want something, I get a plane and a golf course. Even the Syrians, I mean, there seems to be a deal everywhere, and it gets hidden under the fact that, oh, Qatar bought 50 planes from Boeing, so it's good for America.
This is part of the problem with this overly narrow definition of quid pro quo corruption, because we can point to a lot of things. For example, them basically dismantling the unit in the Department of Justice that prosecutes foreign bribery and attempts to penalize foreign bribery. That might be a quid pro quo, but there might not be an explicit agreement that they receive the plane in order to dismantle this unit, or they receive the plane in order to adjust the tariffs. And so the court has made it just impossibly difficult to police corruption, because rarely, if ever, is there going to be a note that says,
in exchange for
plane,
this, yes.
Right, I'll do this tariff rate.
Right.
It's clearly a signal to tell analysts throughout the intelligence community, you tell the truth, you provide objective analysis as you're supposed to be doing, you are running the risk of getting fired.
That was former CIA Director John Brennan on my colleague Nicole Wallace's show just last week. Now, the blockbuster story he was reacting to at the time was the news that Trump Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard had fired intelligence officials for putting out an intelligence report that contradicted Trump. As former CIA Director Brennan put it last week, they were fired for telling the truth. Back in March, Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act to deport Venezuelan immigrants without due process, of course. And his justification at the time, as I'm sure you remember, for invoking the act was his claim that America was being, quote unquote, invaded by Venezuela. Invaded specifically by members of the Tren de Aragua gang at the direction of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. It turns out, though, that, as you all know, that is not true. That's false. The intelligence report these analysts were fired over stated that the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua was not controlled by or in cahoots with Venezuela's president. U.S. intelligence agents reported the actual truth, the truth that contradicted Trump, and were fired for it. That in its own was, of course, a jaw-dropping revelation. And that is where the story stood last week when former CIA Director John Brennan commented on it. But now the story has gotten even darker. This week, the New York Times reported that even before Trump Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard fired the agents who published a truthful report, her chief of staff had ordered intelligence analysts to rewrite that truthful report so it could not be, quote, used against Trump. So not only is the Trump administration firing intelligence agencies for telling the truth, they are also pressuring them to be, at least the very least, less than truthful. Joining me now is former CIA Director John Brennan. It's great to see you, and I know you've been following this closely, and as somebody who grew up and had rose to the top of the intelligence community, I can only imagine how outraged you feel as you see all of the developments. But I just have to ask you about this latest one. I mean, what do you make of this reporting that the chief of staff for the director of national intelligence was pressuring intelligence analysts who are not political at all, they're just doing their job, they're providing the analysis, pressuring them to rewrite their findings to be more in line with what Trump wanted?
Well, Jen, it's worrisome on so many levels. First of all, the integrity and objectivity of the intelligence community's analysis is a solemn obligation of all analysts to make sure that there's going to be no politicization of that analysis and that intelligence. And it's quite clear from the reporting that has come out that the direction that was coming from Tulsi Gabbard's chief of staff, Joe Kent, tried to manipulate the analysis so that it would, in fact, conform with what the Trump administration has done on Venezuela. And it's because these analysts resisted that interference is the reason why they were fired. But also, this individual, Joe Kent, has been nominated to be the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. I was the first director of the National Counterterrorism Center. And it's critically important that the leader of that center really makes sure that all analysis that comes out of it is going to adhere to those requirements of objectivity and integrity. And this individual clearly is a partisan individual who wanted to, reshape the analysis again so that it wouldn't be used to undercut either Gabbard or Donald Trump. And again, it's just so contrary to everything that intelligence analysts throughout their careers, throughout their training, have been taught.
At any level, puts them all in an incredibly untenable position. I wanted to ask you, too, about some news that just broke a few hours ago. And we've seen reporting about this for the last couple of weeks. NBC News is reporting that at least half of the National Security Council has been fired or put on leave. And a lot of the explanation you hear from people is, well, Trump doesn't rely on a policy team, so he doesn't need a policy process. And I always say, But that's the whole process of having cabinet agencies and cabinet members debate and suss things out and consider things. It's also the implementation mechanism. But help us understand, you've sat on the NSC, just how big of a deal bringing it down from 350, 400 to whatever size it is now and firing 100 people on a Friday afternoon.
Well, Jen, I think the aim and the purpose is very similar to what they're trying to do with the intelligence analysis. They don't want to have anything, again, that's going to contradict Donald Trump. And as you well know, the National Security Council staff is the staff responsible for debating the various policy issues and exploring options, the pros and cons, to make sure that there is going to be an interagency process and discussion that is going to be able to surface the most advisable path that U.S. policy should go down. But if Donald Trump decides these policies irrespective and without any input, I can see why they wanted to remove individuals within that National Security Council staff, because that is the place where you're going to have options discussed. This is where you may, in fact, raise issues, that's going to, again, be contrary to what Donald Trump's brothers and decisions are. So again, I think it just demonstrates that they don't want any independence of thought within the national security community. They want to make the decisions top down, and it's clear that, after Donald Trump makes these decisions, they just want to have supporting documentation to again, undergird his decisions, again, irrespective of the analytic strength of any of those decisions.
As you know incredibly well, because you've worked with all of them, I mean, there are people on the NSC working on issues that may not be front and center for the president at any given period of time because they're working in different bureaus, working on different things around the world. It's being reported that staffers were only given a half an hour's notice between when they were told they were being put on leave and when they had to exit the building. And there, again, the points of contact when it's working through the interagency. Can you help us understand, I mean, why this could the sudden nature of this seems concerning and destructive on its own, but what do you think?
I think it's very concerning. And, Marco Rubio, who is Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, supposedly had blessed this decision.
Yeah.
And again, this is a way to constrain whatever type of, intelligence as well as discussion needs to take place. The NSC staff is supposed to orchestrate that interagency process. But I think from all accounts, there's really no interagency process right now. It's just, this group of folks up at the top who are moving forward with the decisions that Donald Trump is making, again, without the appropriate input. So, again, this is just antithetical to all of those processes and all the administrations before it that relied heavily on the National Security Council staff in order to make sure that they tee up the options and the pros and cons of those policy courses.
John Brennan, thank you for staying up with us, not up with us, but thank you for being with us on Friday night. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
Turning to politics now, the sweeping domestic policy bill that House Republicans narrowly passed yesterday is running into some fierce early resistance over in the Senate. NBC News chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles has the latest on the fight to advance President Trump's agenda.
A major victory for President Trump after his signature legislative package cleared a big hurdle, narrowly passing the House Speaker Mike Johnson, making good on a promise to pass the bill before the holiday weekend.
The House has passed generational, truly nation-shaping legislation to reduce spending and permanently lower taxes for families and job creators.
The massive 1,000-page bill delivers a slew of President Trump's campaign promises, including extending $4.5 trillion in tax cuts passed in the first Trump administration, eliminating income taxes on tips and overtime, and provides billions of dollars in funding for the border wall and mass deportations. It also makes changes to Medicaid, imposing work requirements for the able-bodied adults without dependents in order to stay on the program. Democrats oppose it, saying it will lead to millions losing health coverage.
This day may very well turn out to be the day that House Republicans lost control of the United States House of Representatives.
But the bill now faces a rocky path in the Republican-held Senate.
The Senate's going to want to put its own stamp on this. We'll write our own version of the bill.
Senate Republicans can only lose 2 votes, and GOP senators are already saying the bill does not cut spending enough.
We are stealing from our children and grandchildren, and that's why there's no way I'm going to vote for this bill in its current form.
Ali Vitale, we know that House Speaker Johnson has a couple of times now really cautioned the Senate, like, look, we put a lot of work into this. The bill is perfect as is. Don't touch it. Well, they're not listening. The Senate doesn't like to be lectured from the House to begin with. And there's a lot in here that we've been playing this morning that the Senate is simply, they're not comfortable with. So take us inside the GOP there in the upper chamber. What is going to be the game plan as they look at this piece of legislation?
So I think the conversation that we were having at the end of Way Too Early is actually the right way to tee this up. It's around the idea that the Senate is going to make changes, but the extent to those changes is sort of up in the air. Because, yes, you've heard Republican senators say that they are uncomfortable with the idea of cutting this much from Medicaid, of taking away food assistance programs and other pieces of the legislation. And yet, it's really not going to be easy for them to find more cuts than the House was able to find. And so that might limit their ability to make these kinds of changes. And then don't forget the fact that Trump is looming over all of this and has shown that he's willing to bring everyone in, give them a verbal lashing, and then say that they need to get on board with the bill. And so, Eugene, whether there's changes or not, Republicans in the House are still going to have to defend the package that they here initially voted for. And it's full of things that mean that people could lose food assistance programs and lose health care.
Yeah, there's lots of reasons for this bill to be unpopular. And one of them, of course, is this huge cut to Medicaid, which affects so many people. It affects rural hospitals across the country. It affects red states as well as blue. And so that is a very big deal. The other thing that's a huge deal is that this adds trillions of dollars to the deficit. The Republican Party, I'm old enough to remember when the Republican Party really cared a lot about trying to reduce our accumulated debt, which is now greater than 100% of our GDP. But this just makes it worse by continuing these enormous tax cuts. And so they got a lot of explaining to do. And I think the Senate is going to rightly be worried that a lot of voters are going to have questions about various parts of this big, I don't think so beautiful bill.
Yeah, other folks have been substituting various adjectives for beautiful. Joining us now, contributing columnist for The Hill, Matt Lewis. Matt, good morning. The bill certainly has elements of it that would appear to be politically rather unpopular. But it's also, and this is an interesting aspect of this, we heard from these Republican senators, by their definition, it's actually not conservative at all. Where do you see, as you see here, Charles C. Cook, a conservative writer, says the Senate should rip it to pieces. Give us your sense as to what this bill actually is and what its future might be.
Yeah, look, it takes a lot of chutzpah to, pass a bill that raises the deficit by trillions of dollars and, call it conservative. It seems like their definition of limited government is spinning like a drunken sailor who just won the lottery. So it will be interesting to see. Obviously, the House Freedom Caucus mostly went along with this, and we'll see if some of the, deficit and budget hawks in the Senate do as well. Let me say, though, I am impressed with the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. This is a guy who, this is like finding out the guy who volunteers to run the church potluck somehow rewrote the tax code. It's stunning to me what he has pulled off. But of course, it's not Mike Johnson pulling it off. It's Donald Trump. And to me, that's what the big story here is. It's this Republican Congress, with a couple of exceptions like Thomas Massie, is going to do whatever Donald Trump tells them to do. And so, yes, I think that the Senate will find a way to, put their stamp, as Josh Hawley said, on this bill. And there will be tweaks. But at the end of the day, this is a party completely beholden to Donald Trump. I don't think he really cares that much about the details, about Medicaid, about spending. I think he likes getting things done and having a deal. And so this will happen.
He likes getting a deal, and he likes the tax cuts, to be sure. So, Peter Baker, let's natural segue to you here about how the White House is looking at all of this. President Trump has certainly posted on Truth Social a few celebratory messages in the last day or so since the House passed the bill. But, look, aides I speak to, they see some of the misgivings the Senate is expressing. How are people you've talked to within the West Wing, how are they going to approach this? Do they anticipate the Senate, like the House, will eventually fall in line?
Yeah, I think they think that eventually it will. It doesn't mean it's going to be a pretty path to get there. There's going to be plenty of twists and turns. They still hope to get it all done by the 4th of July so he can, make it a patriotic act of signing the bill. The president said the other day, I think, that it will be the most impactful, most extraordinary legislation in the history of the country, which, of course, one can debate. But he has attached that much importance to it, right? And therefore, it's too big to fail, right? He's not going to let senators' qualms get in the way of a final passage. And I think to your point, to Matt's point, I don't think he cares what's in it. As long as he's able to say he has big tax cuts, he does want to deliver on specific campaign promises like eliminating taxes on tips and overtime, things he can point to and say promises made, promises delivered. But beyond that, he has no problem if the senators want to fiddle around with it, as long as it doesn't poison it in a way that means it can't be passed also again in the House once it returns there. I interviewed his chief tax policy person from the first administration a few years back about the original tax cut bill. And he said Donald Trump had nothing to do with it. He had zero to do with any of the details. It was crafted entirely by the Hill. That's what's going to happen again here. But he is the hammer. He's the guy you bring in at the end to say, okay, enough fiddling around, just pass it. And I imagine at some point they'll get to that same stage, whether they can get it done by the 4th or not, open question.
Yeah, his grip on the Republican Party remains vice-like.